My entitled neighbor called 911 on my organic farm and got me slapped with a $15,000 fine for violations that don't even exist. I'm standing here in boots caked with 3 generations of honest farm mud, holding this bogus citation, breathing in the smell of diesel fuel and fresh manure that apparently offends her delicate suburban sensibilities. This woman moved next door 6 months ago and has been trying to destroy my family's livelihood ever since. She weaponized every government agency she could find: agricultural department, water board, county inspectors, all to shut down the farm my grandfather built with his bare hands in 1943. But here's what she didn't know about me. What would you do if some entitled transplant tried to use bureaucrats as their personal army against your family business? And where are you watching from? I guarantee you've got neighbor horror stories that'll make this one look tame. The look on her face when I finally revealed who I really was, absolutely priceless. My name is Reed Hartwell, and I'm the 3rd generation to work this 40-acre slice of heaven in rural Pennsylvania. My grandfather bought this land in 1943 when he came back from the war, converted it from a struggling dairy operation into what's now one of the most successful organic vegetable farms in the county. The smell of coffee brewing in our old farmhouse kitchen at 5 a.m. has been the same for 80 years. Strong, bitter, and potent enough to resurrect the dead, which is exactly what you need when you're feeding half the county. My 16-year-old daughter, Sage, and I have been running this place together since my wife passed 3 years ago. Every morning before dawn, the metallic clang of loading fresh herbs and vegetables into our truck echoes across the property, followed by the diesel rumble of the school bus picking her up. It's a rhythm as reliable as sunrise, the sound of honest work. Then Vivian Blackwood moved in next door and decided our family legacy was her personal problem. This 52-year-old divorce from suburban Philadelphia bought the adjacent 5-acre hobby farm 6 months ago with what had to be a massive settlement. She rolled up in a pristine white BMW that had clearly never seen a gravel road, stepped out in designer heels, and surveyed my operation like a health inspector finding roaches in a restaurant kitchen. First week, she knocked on my door with a plate of obviously store-bought cookies, still had the grocery store price sticker on the bottom, which I found hilarious, and a smile that screamed, "I'm about to ruin your life." She gushed about being so excited to join this quaint, rural community, pronouncing rural like it was a foreign word she just learned. The taste of dust hung in the summer air as she explained her vision, turning the area into a proper countryside retreat where people could enjoy the beauty of agriculture without the unpleasant realities. Translation: she wanted the Instagram aesthetic of farm life, without the actual farming. The complaint started immediately, a passive-aggressive note about my rooster crowing at 6 a.m. Surely there must be noise ordinances, even in civilized areas. Then phone calls about my irrigation runoff, allegedly crossing onto her property, creating what she dramatically called unsanitary water conditions. Here's what really happened. My grandfather's irrigation system, installed in 1955 and maintained religiously ever since, produces runoff that's cleaner than most people's drinking water. I've been certified organic for 15 years. My soil tests come back so clean that agricultural students use them as textbook examples. But Vivian wasn't interested in facts. She was interested in warfare. The nuclear option came when she filed a formal complaint with the county agricultural department, alleging I was using dangerous industrial pesticides that threatened groundwater safety. The woman accused me of using chemicals I've literally never owned, let alone applied to crops that people eat. When the inspector arrived, a decent guy named Martinez, who clearly expected to find major violations based on Vivian's hysterical complaint, I spent 4 hours proving my innocence. Every certification, every soil test, every water quality report. He admitted afterward it was one of the cleanest operations he'd ever inspected. But bureaucracy doesn't care about truth, Even when you're completely innocent, you still have to hire lawyers to prove it. That agricultural attorney consultation cost me $2,000 I desperately needed for equipment repairs. Money that should have gone towards Sage's college fund instead of defending myself against lies. The real knife twist, Vivian positioned herself as the heroic, concerned citizen, protecting our community from dangerous industrial farming. She started a Facebook group called Preserve Our Rural Heritage and posted photos of my 70-year-old tractor, calling it heavy industrial machinery that threatens our peaceful neighborhood. My grandfather's rebuilt John Deere became industrial machinery. My organic vegetable operation that supplies 30 local restaurants became a factory farm threat. The community started fracturing. Longtime neighbors who'd bought my produce for decades stood firmly behind me. But newer suburban transplants, people who moved here for the rural aesthetic without understanding rural reality, began whispering doubts. Maybe that nice lady Vivian had a point. Maybe Reed's farm really was too noisy, too messy, too real for their countryside fantasy. 3 generations of feeding this community, and suddenly, I'm the villain. 2 weeks after the agricultural department cleared me completely, Vivian launched her next assault. This time, she'd done her homework. At 7:15 on a Tuesday morning, while I was loading tomatoes that still smelled like summer earth and morning dew, a county inspector pulled into my driveway with an official noise. Complaint. Apparently, my excessive agricultural noise before 7 a.m. violated County Ordinance 27B regarding sound pollution in residential areas. The inspector, a tired-looking guy named Peterson, apologized as he pulled out his decibel meter. "I've got to follow up on every complaint," he said, wincing as my diesel generator kicked on with its familiar mechanical growl that's been the soundtrack of this farm since 1962. Even the ones that make me question humanity. Here's the mini twist that wiped the smug smile right off Vivian's face when she heard the results. After her first bogus complaint, I'd spent every evening for 2 weeks diving into agricultural law like I was studying for the bar exam. I handed Peterson a thick folder containing 3 years of tax returns, commercial sales records totaling over $180,000 annually, state agricultural registration, and organic certification documents. His eyebrows shot up as he realized he was looking at one of the most legitimate farming operations in the county. "Well, hell," he said, closing the folder with a satisfying thud. "You're clearly a bona fide agricultural operation. This ordinance has about as much legal weight here as a chocolate teapot." He scribbled notes on his citation pad, "But I'm curious. How did she know to file this complaint at exactly 7:15 when your schedule varies?" That question had been eating at me like a tick. My morning routine depended on weather, crop cycles, and market demands. Yet somehow Vivian's complaints hit at moments of maximum chaos. Either she had supernatural timing or she was stalking my operation like a private investigator. So I started connecting dots. Every Tuesday and Friday farmers' market days, I'd catch glimpses of movement behind her designer window blinds. When I installed new drip irrigation, she filed a water complaint before the crew finished lunch. When soil testers arrived to check nutrient levels, she reported suspicious chemical activity while they were still unloading equipment. The bitter taste of realization hit me. This woman was conducting full-scale surveillance of my family's farm. But here's where her plan backfired spectacularly. My 16-year-old daughter, Sage, who inherited her great-grandfather's suspicious mind, suggested we flip the script. "Dad, if she's spying on us, let's spy back legally." Smart kid. We installed basic trail cameras, the kind deer hunters use around our property perimeter. Within a week, we had footage that would make a stalking victim's attorney salivate with joy. Vivian had a morning routine more precise than a Swiss watch. 6 a.m. property line patrol with professional-grade binoculars, photographing my operations from multiple angles, taking notes on a clipboard. She was building a case file like she was gathering evidence for a criminal prosecution. When Peterson confirmed 0 violations and drove away, I showed him our surveillance footage on my phone. His expression shifted from bureaucratic fatigue to genuine alarm. "That's not normal neighbor behavior," he said, watching Vivian crouch behind her fence with a telephoto camera lens. "That's systematic harassment designed to disrupt legitimate business operations. You might want to document this for legal purposes." The next morning, the cavalry arrived in the form of 3 neighboring farmers bearing coffee in solidarity: the Kowalski brothers, who've been running cattle since Carter was president, and Martha Bennett, whose organic herb operation supplies half the restaurants in Pittsburgh, gathered around my kitchen table with the grim satisfaction of people comparing war wounds. Turns out I wasn't Vivian's only victim. She'd weaponized obscure ordinances against everyone. Noise complaints about early morning cattle feeding, excessive bee activity, reports, even a complaint about Martha's unauthorized roadside produce stand that had operated legally for 15 years. Over Martha's incredible honey wheat bread, the sweet smell mixing with fresh coffee that actually tasted like hope. We mapped Vivian's strategy: research obscure regulations, file complaints at maximum disruption times, then play innocent victim protecting community standards. She asked me last week if I was planning to expand or sell to someone who could optimize the land's potential, Martha said, her usually calm voice tight with anger. When I said, "Hell no," suddenly my bees became a public menace. The pieces snapped together like puzzle pieces. Vivian wasn't just harassing farmers. She was systematically making agriculture so legally expensive and bureaucratically impossible that we'd surrender and sell. I looked at these good people who'd supported 3 generations of my family and realized she picked the wrong damn community to mess with. But I also realized something darker. This wasn't random suburban entitlement. This was coordinated, professional, and expensive. Someone was paying Vivian to wage war on our farms. 3 weeks later, Vivian escalated to biological warfare. She went after my water. I was checking irrigation lines on a scorching August morning when my neighbor Jim Kowalski called, panic crackling through his voice like static. "Reed, you better get over here. Vivian's got some state official with a clipboard measuring your property line, and she's grinning like a cat in a canary factory." By the time I jogged over, sweat already gluing my shirt to my back in the brutal 90-degree heat, a state inspector was photographing my irrigation intake pipe, while Vivian stood nearby, practically vibrating with excitement. The smell of hot metal and baking earth made everything feel like a pressure cooker about to explode. Mr. Hartwell, the inspector, a no-nonsense woman named Rodriguez, held up a complaint thick enough to choke a horse. "We've received allegations that your agricultural irrigation is illegally appropriating groundwater from neighboring properties, potentially violating state water rights statutes." Vivian's smile could have lit up Times Square. She'd found the nuclear option. Water rights disputes in Pennsylvania are legal quicksand that can drown farmers even when they're completely innocent. But here is where 80 years of my grandfather's Depression-era paranoia turned into pure legal gold. My grandfather wasn't just a farmer. He was a documentation fanatic who recorded everything like the government was coming to steal his land, which growing up during the Depression wasn't exactly paranoia. When I led Rodriguez down to our farmhouse basement, the musty smell of old paper and cedar mothballs hit us like stepping into a time capsule. I hauled out a metal filing cabinet that weighed more than a small tractor and cracked open the drawer labeled Water Rights 1943-1960. Rodriguez's jaw literally dropped as I spread out hand-drawn property surveys, original well drilling permits, and water usage logs, with entries in my grandfather's meticulous hand draw. My grandfather documented every gallon like his life depended on it, I explained, pointing to ledger entries in faded blue ink. Continuous agricultural water use since 1943, with official state permits filed the moment they started requiring them in 1955. Rodriguez photographed each document with the reverence of an archaeologist discovering King Tut's tomb. Legally speaking, that's exactly what she was looking at. Documentation so thorough it would make modern lawyers weep with envy. Meanwhile, Vivian's smugness melted faster than ice cream on asp. Halt! Her complaint claimed my irrigation was stealing her well water, but my documentation proved my family's water rights were older than television. This is remarkably comprehensive, Rodriguez said, clearly amazed by my grandfather's obsessive record-keeping. The metallic click of her camera sounded like a countdown timer ticking against Vivian's hopes. Most properties can barely prove water usage beyond a decade. This establishes prior appropriation rights that would survive any legal challenge. But Vivian wasn't ready to surrender. As Rodriguez packed her equipment, Vivian launched into an Oscar-worthy performance complete with trembling voice and tears that appeared on cue, like she'd been practicing in the mirror. "I'm just a defenseless woman, trying to build a peaceful life in this community," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue that materialized from thin air. "My well water drops every time he runs that industrial irrigation system. I'm terrified I'll run completely dry." Here's the thing that made Rodriguez's pen stop moving. I hadn't changed my irrigation system in 20 years. Same pipes, same flow rates, same everything. But Vivian had clearly studied emotional manipulation like it was a college course. Rodriguez, bless her professional soul, stayed ice cold. "Ma'am, I'll need documented evidence of well depletion, flow measurements, usage records, anything showing actual impact rather than feelings." That's when Vivian stepped on the legal landmine that blew up her entire case. "Well, I don't have official measurements, but obviously his massive industrial farming operation is draining our entire aquifer," she declared with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged. Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up as she looked from Vivian's manicured 5-acre lawn to my modest organic vegetable operation. "Ma'am, this appears to be small-scale sustainable agriculture. What exactly makes this industrial?" Watching Vivian backpedal was like watching someone try to unring a bell. She stammered about intensive farming and excessive water use, but Rodriguez had clearly handled enough bogus complaints to smell manufactured outrage from a mile away. After Rodriguez left with a preliminary finding that my water rights were unshakable, I made a discovery that changed everything. A quick records search revealed Vivian's property purchase was financed by Rural Development Partners LLC. That night, digging deeper through my grandfather's papers, I found mineral rights documentation that made my hands shake. My family owned everything under this land, and according to recent geological surveys, that everything was worth millions. Vivian wasn't trying to quiet my farm, she was trying to buy it cheap. Labor Day weekend, Vivian decided to go nuclear. She didn't just attack my farm, she attacked my family. I was loading sweet corn for the holiday farmers market when my phone buzzed with a text that made my blood freeze. "Please call regarding concerns about Sage's home environment." NT. The September heat was making my shirt stick to my back like plastic wrap, but suddenly I felt colder than a January morning. Principal Martinez sounded like he'd rather be anywhere else when I called back. "Reed, I've received some concerns from a community member questioning whether your farm provides a safe environment for a teenager. Chemical exposure, heavy machinery, dangers, you know the drill. The smell of diesel exhaust from my truck, mixed with the earthy sweetness of fresh corn, but all I could taste was pure molten rage." Vivian had crossed the sacred line from harassing my business to threatening my daughter. "Let me guess," I said, gripping the phone hard enough to crack the case. "Anonymous concerned citizen. I can't say officially, but the caller suggested we might need to involve social services to ensure Sage's well-being." Martinez's voice carried the weariness of a man forced to take obvious harassment seriously. "Reed, I've known your family since Sage was in kindergarten. This smells like wrapped in fake concern, but I'm legally required to document it." Here's where Vivian made the tactical error that would destroy her entire campaign. She underestimated a farmer's daughter. Sage Hartwell inherited her great-grandfather's stubborn streak, her late mother's sharp mind, and apparently a natural talent for detective work. When she found out someone was questioning her home life, she didn't cry or hide. She got methodical. That evening, over dinner that tasted key cardboard because my appetite had disappeared, Sage spread out a composition, notebook filled with her careful handwriting and the focused intensity of a prosecutor building a case. "Dad, I've been keeping track of everything Mrs. Blackwood does. Want to see how crazy she really is?" My 16-year-old daughter had been conducting surveillance on our stalker. Time-stamped photos of Vivian's morning property line patrols, audio recordings legally obtained from our own property of her making false claims to neighbors, screenshots of social media posts calling our farm dangerous and unsuitable for children. The crisp sound of notebook pages turning filled our kitchen as Sage laid out evidence that would make a private investigator jealous. She parks at the end of our driveway every Tuesday and Friday morning to photograph you loading the truck. Same spot, same time, like she's punching a time clock. But the real bombshell was Vivian's Facebook post from the previous week. Deeply concerned about children being exposed to industrial farming chemicals and heavy machinery. How do we protect our community's youth from unsafe living conditions? 17 comments from suburban transplants expressing manufactured concern about kids living on working farms. People who'd moved to rural areas for Instagram-worthy sunsets but couldn't handle the reality of agriculture. Here's the mini twist that turned Vivian's nuclear option into a dud. My daughter was 3 steps ahead of her. "Dad, look at this time." "Stamp," Sage said, pointing to her phone with the satisfaction of someone solving a murder mystery. She posted this 3 days before calling the school. She's been planning this attack on our family for weeks, building fake community support first. That's when the pieces clicked together, like a rifle bolt sliding home. I wasn't just fighting for my farm anymore. I was fighting for my right to raise my daughter in the home her mother had loved, on the land her ancestors had built with blood, sweat, and Depression-era determination. Monday morning, I walked into Principal Martinez's office carrying documentation thick enough to stop a small-caliber bullet. 3 generations of family history, safety certifications for every piece of equipment, organic farming credentials proving we used fewer chemicals than most suburban lawns, character references from pediatricians, teachers, and half the county. Martinez reviewed everything with judicial thoroughness. Read, "This is textbook harassment disguised as community concern. I'm documenting in Sage's file that these complaints appear motivated by personal vendetta rather than genuine safety issues." But Vivian's desperation was just getting started. That afternoon, she petitioned the county zoning board to rezone my farm from agricultural to residential, claiming it posed industrial hazards incompatible with family neighborhoods. The hearing Friday afternoon, right in the middle of harvest season, when losing a day meant losing sands in perishable crops. That's when I stopped playing defense and decided to burn her entire operation to the ground. Time to find out who was really behind Vivian Blackwood's war on rural families. And time to show them what happens when you threaten a farmer's daughter. Tuesday night, while digging through my grandfather's old papers for zoning documents, I found something that changed everything. Buried beneath decades of tax records and equipment warranties, wrapped in oilcloth that still smelled faintly of the machine shop where my grandfather had stored it, were documents I'd never seen. Mineral rights, certificates dating back to 1943, comprehensive water rights deeds, and this made my hand shake like I'd grabbed a live wire. A geological survey from 1987, estimating our underground assets at $3.2 million in 1987. Adjusted for inflation and current natural gas prices, we were sitting on close to $15 million worth of mineral wealth. My grandfather hadn't just bought a farm. The crafty old bastard had bought Fort Knox with a vegetable garden on top. The survey detailed natural gas deposits, rare earth minerals, and water rights extending far beyond our 40 acres. Rights that, according to Pennsylvania law, couldn't be separated from surface property without explicit owner consent. Rights that made forced sale through harassment or eminent domain about as likely as snow in July. But here's where the story gets really interesting. While I was discovering my family's buried treasure, my investigation into Vivian was uncovering her role in a conspiracy that would make mobsters blush. Property records revealed Rural Development Partners, LLC, had systematically purchased 17 farms across 3 states over 5 years. Same playbook every time. Shell company finances concerned neighbor to buy adjacent property. Harassment campaign begins. Farmers eventually sell cheap to escape legal nightmare. The coffee in my kitchen suddenly tasted like liquid gold as I realized the scope of this operation. Vivian wasn't just an entitled neighbor. She was a professional agricultural predator working for people with serious money. But the revelation that made me actually laugh out loud came when I traced the Shell company ownership through 3 layers of corporate paperwork designed to hide the truth. The ultimate puppet master, Marcellus Energy Corporation, a fracking giant that had been quietly acquiring mineral rights across Pennsylvania for shale gas extraction. They'd targeted my farm because we sat on top of one of the richest natural gas deposits in the region. Deposits worth tens of millions in extraction rights if they could get control of both surface and subsurface property. The beautiful irony, they couldn't legally force me to sell mineral rights, so they had hired Vivian to torture my family into giving up and selling everything cheap. Except my grandfather's paranoid documentation had just handed me enough legal ammunition to blow their entire operation AP. Art. I called my attorney, Jim Patterson, at 11 p.m., too excited to wait for morning. Jim, hypothetically, if a corporation was using systematic harassment to force below-market property sales for resource extraction, what kind of criminal charges are we talking about? Fraud, conspiracy, racketeering if you can prove coordination across state lines. His voice sharpened with the hunger of a lawyer smelling a massive case. Please tell me you have evidence. When I explained the connection between Vivian, multiple shell companies, and Marcellus Energy's acquisition strategy, the silence stretched so long I thought he'd had a heart attack. Reed, he finally whispered, you're not fighting a neighbor dispute. You're sitting on evidence of corporate conspiracy that could result in federal charges and millions in damages. The next morning brought official vindication. The agricultural inspector called with news that made my week. Mr. Hartwell, every complaint against your operation was not just false. It was deliberately fabricated. We're recommending criminal investigation for false reporting. Better yet, we've identified similar fraudulent complaint patterns against 6 other farms in your area, all filed by the same individual. Vivian had been so busy making my life hell, she'd created a paper trail of criminal evidence that would make prosecutors salivate. Friday's zoning hearing was going to be a massacre, but not the kind Vivian was expecting. I'm to introduce her to the concept of consequences. Wednesday morning, my kitchen transformed into a war room that would have made Pentagon strategists jealous. By 8 a.m., I had 5 farmers, 2 attorneys, a county commissioner, and enough coffee brewing to fuel a small revolution. The smell of bacon grease mixing with fresh ground coffee and simmering rage created an atmosphere thick enough to choke on. Jim Patterson, my attorney, spread legal documents across my kitchen table like a general planning the siege of Troy. Gentlemen, what we have here is a textbook GECO case. Racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations. Marcellus Energy has been using systematic fraud to acquire mineral rights through coordinated harassment campaigns. Martha Bennett leaned forward, herb-stained fingers drumming the table with barely contained fury. They hit my operation with 8 bogus complaints in 6 months. Cost me $4,000 in legal fees before I realized I wasn't going crazy. I was being targeted. The Kowalski brothers, built like the cattle they raise and twice as stubborn, nodded grimly. Water rights violations, noise complaints, livestock safety reports, all appearing like magic right after those geological survey trucks started sniffing around our property lines. County Commissioner Sarah Walsh, a farm daughter who could probably arm wrestle most men in the room, had brought her own ammunition. Read, I audited complaint records after your call. Marcellus Energy has 17 pending fracking permits in this county. Every single location corresponds to properties that have faced harassment in the past 2 years. The gentle scrape of ceramic coffee mugs against my wooden table provided a soundtrack for revelation as we mapped out what was clearly corporate warfare disguised as neighbor disputes. This wasn't random suburban entitlement. This was organized crime with environmental permits. Ad opened a folder thick enough to serve as body armor. I've coordinated with attorneys in Ohio and West Virginia. Identical patterns, shell company property purchases, systematic neighbor complaints. Farmers selling below market to escape legal nightmares were documenting interstate conspiracy. Here's where my grandfather's Depression-era paranoia became our nuclear weapon. While other farmers had basic documentation, I had 8 decades of obsessively maintained records proving every aspect of our operation was not just legitimate, but exemplary. Reed's documentation is legally bulletproof, Patterson explained. The satisfaction in his voice is rich as the coffee smell filling my kitchen. Even if harassment forced him to sell surface rights, those mineral rights are untouchable. Their entire strategy was built on a legal impossibility. Martha actually snorted with laughter, the first time I'd heard her genuinely amused in months. So, they've been spending thousands trying to steal something that's legally unstealable. Worse, they've been creating federal criminal evidence while attempting impossible theft. The sweet anticipation of justice mixed with Martha's homemade jam as we planned our coordinated counterattack. Instead of individual defense, we were mounting unified offense with the precision of a military operation. Commissioner Walsh volunteered to conduct a comprehensive audit of every agricultural complaint filed county-wide, building a database that would prove systematic targeting. The Kowalski brothers would organize affected farmers into a legal coalition with shared resources and coordinated testimony. Martha would handle agricultural media outreach and local news coverage. My assignment? Spring the perfect trap at Friday's zoning hearing. They're expecting you to show up alone with basic property paperwork, Patterson explained, his lawyer's grin getting predatory as he outlined our strategy. Instead, you're bringing federal conspiracy evidence supported by 6 farmers ready to testify about identical harassment patterns, backed by documented proof of corporate coordination. The real beauty of our plan was its simplicity. Vivian expected a desperate farmer making emotional appeals about family heritage. She was getting a coordinated legal assault that would expose her entire operation as criminal fraud. But I had one more surprise that nobody in this room knew about. Something that would turn Friday's hearing from legal victory into complete annihilation of their conspiracy. Let's just say my background included more than organic farming expertise. The rustle of papers and scrape of chairs filled my kitchen as our coalition prepared to execute individual assignments. Everyone had specific missions: documentation gathering, witness coordination, media strategy, federal filings. By Friday, we'd have enough evidence to bury Vivian and Marcellus Energy so deep they'd need archaeological equipment to find daylight. The taste of impending victory was sweeter than any crop I'd ever harvested. Time to show these corporate predators what happens when you declare war on rural families who actually know how to fight back. Thursday morning, 24 hours before the zoning hearing, Vivian made her most desperate and catastrophically stupid mistake yet. I was checking irrigation lines when I heard the unmistakable sound of metal grinding against metal, the kind of noise that makes every farmer's soul weep. Racing toward the sound, my boots splashing through puddles of hydraulic fluid that smelled like liquid money bleeding into the earth. I found my main irrigation pump housing cracked open like a broken egg. Sabotage, professional, surgical, and absolutely devastating. The damage was precise. Someone had loosened critical bolts just enough to cause catastrophic failure under normal operating pressure. This wasn't teenage vandalism. This was targeted destruction. Time to hit during peak harvest week, when losing irrigation meant watching thousands of dollars in crops wither and die. But here's where Vivian's desperation turned into comedy gold. My security cameras had captured her entire criminal performance in high-definition glory. The footage was better than Netflix. Tuesday night, 2:47 a.m. Vivian's pristine white BMW creeping down our farm road with headlights off like some suburban ninja. 20 minutes of her fumbling with tools she'd obviously YouTubed how to use, wearing her distinctive pink jogging outfit with reflective stripes that lit up my infrared cameras like a disco ball. I called Sheriff Morrison, my voice shaking with equal parts rage and laughter. "Sheriff, I've got video evidence of criminal sabotage that's so clear it could be used in training videos. Reed, I'll be there in 15 minutes. This I've got to see." While waiting for law enforcement, I documented everything. Photos, measurements, repair estimates. The damage totaled $8,500 in equipment, plus crop losses from irrigation downtime. But the real violation was deeper. This was an attack on machinery my grandfather had maintained like a sacred trust for 80 years. Jim Patterson arrived with the sheriff, took one look at the sabotage, and started laughing like he'd discovered buried treasure. "Reed, she just gift-wrapped felony charges to go with our civil conspiracy case. Criminal destruction of property, criminal mischief, and if we can prove intimidation intent, possibly domestic terrorism." But Vivian's sabotage backfired more spectacularly than a defective firework. Word spread through our farming community faster than wildfire through dry corn. By noon, my driveway looked like a rural emergency response convention. Martha Bennett arrived with her husband and a hydraulic pump that fit my system perfectly. The metallic clang of equipment unloading echoing across the property like a battle cry. "Reed, corporate sabotage isn't destroying our neighbor's harvest, not on our watch." The Kowalski brothers showed up with their entire extended family, 6 adults, enough tools to rebuild Detroit, and the kind of grim determination that built America's heartland. The afternoon air filled with the symphony of working hands, generators humming, wrenches ringing against metal, and conversations punctuated by the satisfying clicks of properly assembled equipment. But Vivian's masterpiece of stupidity was still coming. That afternoon, she called my insurance company with a claim so breathtakingly idiotic it achieved artistic levels of self-destruction. She told them I damaged my own equipment to file a fraudulent insurance claim. The insurance investigator, a razor-sharp woman named Reynolds, called me within hours. "Mr. Hartwell, someone has made very serious accusations about your irrigation damage claim. They're suggesting you committed insurance fraud." The pause that followed crackled with professional suspicion until I explained about months of harassment and offered to send security footage of the actual sabotage. Reynolds' voice transformed from skeptical to predatory in real time. "Sir, filing false reports to insurance companies is a federal felony. We'll be coordinating with law enforcement to prosecute whoever made these accusations to the fullest extent of the law." By evening, my irrigation system was running smoother than a Swiss watch, thanks to community solidarity that turned criminal sabotage into neighborhood bonding. The sweet sound of water flowing through upgraded connections, mixed with the satisfaction of watching Vivian's desperation create federal charges. Sheriff Morrison's evening update was the perfect ending to a perfect day of justice. "Reed, we executed search warrants this afternoon. Found the tools used in your sabotage in Miss Blackwood's garage, still covered in your hydraulic fluid." He paused, savoring the moment like fine wine. "She tried claiming someone planted evidence, right up until we showed her the security footage of her wearing those pink stripes like a reflective target. Vivian had escalated from harassment to sabotage to insurance fraud in 72 hours, creating enough criminal evidence to keep prosecutors busy for months. Tomorrow's zoning hearing was going to be a public execution, but she'd be the one facing the firing squad. Friday morning, 4 hours before the zoning hearing that would decide my farm's fate, Vivian launched her final, most spectacularly desperate assault. At 6 a.m., while I was loading evidence boxes into my truck, 3 county vehicles screamed into my driveway with sirens wailing like the apocalypse was arriving for breakfast. The lead inspector jumped out with a clipboard, thick enough to stop bullets, and the wild-eyed expression of someone expecting to find a chemical weapons factory. "Emergency agricultural inspection," he shouted over the dying sirens. "We've received reports of immediate public health threats requiring urgent government intervention." The crisp morning air still carried the comforting smell of bacon from my kitchen. But suddenly, everything tasted like impending disaster. This wasn't routine harassment. This was a desperate Hail Mary designed to create an emergency that would postpone the hearing and buy Vivian time to escape the legal noose tightening around her neck. But here's the mini twist that turned Vivian's nuclear option into a spectacular backfire. The lead inspector's supervisor recognized my property from previous federal agricultural crime investigations. Captain Rodriguez from the State Agricultural Enforcement Division stepped out of the second vehicle, took one look at my pristine organic operation, and her expression shifted from official concern to professional skepticism. "Inspector Johnson," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen every type of agricultural fraud imaginable. "Remind me exactly who filed this emergency complaint." Johnson suddenly looked like he'd rather be investigating actual emergencies instead of suburban neighbor drama. "Anonymous tip called in at 5:30 this morning. Claimed immediate chemical contamination requiring emergency response." The metallic click of Rodriguez's pen sounded like a countdown timer as she made notes. At 5:30 a.m. on the morning of a scheduled zoning hearing. How remarkably convenient. Rodriguez's inspection took exactly 12 minutes, long enough to confirm my operation was cleaner than most hospital operating rooms, and document that the anonymous complaint was pure fiction wrapped in false emergency rhetoric. "Mr. Hartwell," she said loudly enough for her subordinates to hear clearly, "whoever filed this false emergency report has committed felony abuse of government resources. We'll be recommending full prosecution." But Vivian's desperation symphony wasn't finished. As the inspection vehicles departed, my phone erupted with calls from local media outlets. Someone had anonymously tipped off reporters about an emergency environmental investigation at my farm, promising them front-page stories about imminent public health disasters. Channel 8 News arrived first, their van's engines still ticking with heat as the crew unloaded camera equipment heavy enough to film a Hollywood movie. The county newspaper followed, then 2 agricultural trade publications, all expecting to document environmental catastrophe. The sound of diesel generators powering camera lights mixed with the confused chatter of reporters realizing they'd been lured to what appeared to be one of the cleanest farming operations in the state. Instead of environmental disaster, they got the story of their careers. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, standing beside irrigation equipment that practically sparkled in the morning sun. "You've been brought here under completely false pretenses to witness the final desperate act of a 6-month criminal conspiracy." You could practically hear the reporters' minds shifting gears from environmental disaster to criminal investigation as I outlined months of systematic harassment, corporate conspiracy, and the federal case that had been quietly building evidence. Channel 8's lead reporter, Sarah Martinez, was practically vibrating with excitement as she processed the implications. "Mr. Hartwell, are you alleging organized corporate fraud designed to force rural property sales through harassment? I'm saying the evidence will speak for itself. in exactly 90 minutes at a public hearing where the perpetrator expected to destroy my family's legacy. The sweet anticipation of justice mixed with fresh morning air as I watched reporters frantically researching background information that would transform a routine zoning hearing into must-see local television. But the real fireworks were still coming, something that would turn this local harassment story into a federal case study taught in law enforcement meets. By the time we reached the courthouse, Vivian would learn that her systematic campaign hadn't just failed. It had exposed a criminal enterprise that federal authorities had been tracking across multiple states. The hearing she'd orchestrated as my family's funeral was about to become her own legal Uriel. Time to show everyone what happens when corporate criminals pick the wrong farmer to mess with. The county courthouse looked like a media circus had collided with a small-town revolution and exploded into pure chaos. By 2:00 p.m., the parking lot overflowed with pickup trucks, news vans, and enough angry farmers to stage a coup. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with fresh autumn air, and the electric tension of a community that had finally reached its breaking point. Inside, the hearing room was packed beyond fire code limits. Vivian sat at the front table with 2 sharks in 1,000 suits, her confidence radiating like heat from a blast furnace. She dressed for her moment of triumph, designer power suit, professionally styled hair, the smug expression of someone about to watch their enemy's public execution. Behind me sat 30 farmers, their families, local business owners, and half the county's agricultural community. The sound of work boots, shuffling on linoleum, and whispered conversations created a low rumble of barely contained rage. Commissioner Walsh called the hearing to order with a gavel that cracked like a rifle shot. We're here to consider Petition 2024-157, requesting rezoning of the Hartwell property from agricultural to residential use. Vivian's lead attorney, a slick city predator named Bradford, stood with the theatrical confidence of someone delivering a death sentence. Honorable Commissioners, we're here to protect innocent families from an industrial operation masquerading as a quaint family farm. He spread out a presentation thick with blown-up photos of my equipment, fabricated water usage charts, and doctored noise measurements. The rustle of expensive paper and click of presentation easels filled the room as he painted my 3-generation organic farm as an environmental disaster threatening suburban paradise. Evidence shows systematic violations of community standards, dangerous chemical usage, and industrial-scale operations completely incompatible with residential neighborhoods, Bradford declared with the passion of a prosecutor seeking the death penalty. The commissioners nodded politely as my family's legacy was systematically destroyed with lies, charts, and manufactured outrage. Vivian's smile could have powered the entire courthouse. Then Jim Patterson stood up, and the room's energy shifted like atmospheric pressure dropping before a tornado. Commissioners, before we continue, I need to present evidence that renders this entire petition not just fraudulent, but criminal. Bradford's confidence flickered like a candle in wind. Objection. This is a zoning hearing, not a criminal proceeding. Actually, Sheriff Morrison said, rising from the back like an avenging angel, this is exactly where criminal conspiracies get exposed. That's when I stood up, turned to face Vivian directly, and pulled out the one thing she'd never bothered to investigate about her target. My badge. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, holding up my pen. Sylvania State Police Shield, so everyone could see the federal task force designation. My name is Detective Reed Hartwell, Agricultural Crime Investigation Unit. For the past 6 months, Miss Blackwood has been unknowingly building a federal case against herself. The room exploded into chaos. Vivian's face went whiter than fresh snow. Her attorneys started whispering like their lives depended on it. Reporters typed with the fury of people witnessing history. Commissioner Walsh banged her gavel like she was trying to split wood. Detective Hartwell, please explain. Miss Blackwood's harassment campaign has been funded and coordinated by Marcellus Energy Corporation as part of a systematic scheme to steal rural properties through criminal intimidation. She's committed conspiracy, harassment, sabotage, false reporting, and federal fraud, all while being recorded by a federal investigation. I walked to the evidence table and opened boxes containing 6 months of surveillance footage, financial records, and documented proof of corporate conspiracy. Every complaint she filed, every lie she told, every act of sabotage, we have it all. Vivian finally found her voice, but it came out as a strangled croak. You're a cop, 22 years, 15 specializing in agricultural crime, and you just provided evidence for the largest rural fraud prosecution in state history. The courthouse fell silent, except for camera shutters clicking like machine guns and the scratch of reporters' pens moving faster than hummingbird wings. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward with handcuffs that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Miss Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy, criminal harassment, property destruction, false reporting, and federal fraud. As the cuffs clicked around Vivian's wrists with the finality of a coffin closing, her expensive attorneys were already fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. But the real knockout punch came when FBI agent Sarah Bennett entered with a team of federal investigators wearing expressions that could freeze hellfire. Detective Hartwell, excellent work. We have warrants for 17 Marcellus Energy executives and enough evidence to dismantle the largest agricultural fraud conspiracy in federal history. Vivian's legs gave out completely. She collapsed into her chair like a deflated balloon. The final mic drop moment belonged to Commissioner Walsh. Petition dismissed. And Miss Blackwood, welcome to federal prison. The look of absolute devastation on Vivian's face as she realized she'd spent 6 months building her own criminal case was worth every second of harassment my family had endured. Sometimes justice tastes even sweeter than revenge. 6 months later, my farm looks exactly like it did when my grandfather first cleared this land with his bare hands. Peaceful, productive, and completely free from suburban drama queens with corporate backing. Vivian Blackwood received 18 months in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and criminal harassment, followed by 3 years of supervised probation that prohibits her from owning property within 50 miles of any working farm. Her pristine white BMW was seized as proceeds of criminal activity, which gave me a ridiculous amount of satisfaction every time I drove past the government impound lot. The real fireworks started when Marcellus Energy's executive board began falling like dominoes in federal court. 17 indictments, $47 million in criminal fines, and enough prison sentences to staff a small correctional facility. Their systematic harassment scheme had targeted over 200 rural families across 7 states. Families who are now sharing a settlement large enough to keep their farms running until their great-grandchildren are old and gray. My daughter, Sage, who turns 17 next month, has become something of a local celebrity for her detective work during the harassment campaign. The metallic click of college brochures hitting our mailbox has become a daily soundtrack with criminal justice programs from 3 states offering full scholarships. She's considering following her old man into law enforcement, specifically agricultural crime investigation, because somebody needs to protect farmers from corporate scumbags. That's my girl. Definitely inherited her great-grandfather's colorful vocabulary. The Hartwell Farm Scholarship, funded by our share of the Marcellus settlement, provides full college tuition for rural students studying sustainable agriculture, criminal justice, or environmental law. 23 kids have received funding so far, including Martha Bennett's youngest son, both Kowalski daughters, and the sheriff's nephew, who wants to become an agricultural attorney. Commissioner Walsh leveraged our case to push through the Agricultural Protection Act, making harassment of working farms a state felony with mandatory prison time and creating a legal defense fund for targeted farmers. Pennsylvania now boasts the strongest agricultural protection laws in the country, and 6 other states have adopted nearly identical legislation. The sweet smell of justice mixed with fresh morning coffee as I read this month's Agricultural Crime Quarterly, which featured our case as the cover story. The article titled, "How One Undercover Detective Brought Down Corporate Agriculture Fraud," is now required reading at the FBI Academy and has been translated into 4 languages. But the real victory is beautifully simple. My farm is thriving like never before. Our organic certification remains spotless. Our customer base has tripled thanks to national media coverage, and we're now the primary vegetable supplier for over 60 restaurants across 3 counties. The irrigation system, rebuilt with community solidarity after Vivian's sabotage, runs smoother than a Swiss watchmaker's masterpiece. The taste of sweet vindication never gets old, especially when strangers recognize our story and thank me for fighting back against corporate bullying. Martha Bennett's herb empire expanded into 3 counties. After settlement money allowed equipment upgrades and full-time staff. The Kowalski brothers bought an additional 100 acres and now operate the largest organic cattle ranch in the region. Our entire agricultural community emerged stronger because we stood united against corporate intimidation. The sound of my grandfather's rebuilt John Deere firing up each dawn still marks the beginning of every day. But now it carries the deep satisfaction of knowing our land is protected, not just by ownership documents, but by federal law. Future corporate predators will face prison sentences before they can destroy even one farming family. My grandfather would be proud beyond words. We didn't just save his farm. We protected every rural family facing similar attacks nationwide. Sage still helps me load the truck every morning before school, and sometimes I catch her looking across our fields with the same protective intensity her great-grandfather showed. 4 generations of Hartwells have worked this soil, and thanks to our fight there will be many more. But enough about corporate conspiracies and federal justice. Now I want to hear your stories. Drop a comment sharing your HOA nightmare, neighbor harassment tale, or corporate intimidation experience. Rural communities aren't the only places where entitled people try to destroy others' livelihoods with frivolous complaints and deep pockets. Share your battle. You never know who desperately needs to hear they're not alone in fighting back. Okay? And if this story reminded you why we must protect the families who feed America and fight corporate bullies everywhere, smash that subscribe button harder than Vivian hit federal prison reality. Next week, how an HOA president tried to foreclose on a disabled veteran's home and learned that some wars never end. Keep fighting the good fight. Justice tastes incredible when it finally arrives.